In this section, we are going to talk about purchase requisitions. In short, they are called PREQs or PREQ. To understand purchase requisitions, let's understand what happens in the coffee shop on a daily basis. So we've got our coffee shop, Chicago one, and in the coffee shop, different activities are happening, right? For example, the bakers are baking pastry, cakes, muffins, so on and so forth. The barista is brewing coffee, and the manager is in charge of managing the stores. The bakers work with flour, sugar, so on and so forth. The barista works with coffee, and the manager uses stationery, printers, cartridges, so on and so forth. Now, these people of all know the requirements of, for example, how much flour is required, how much sugar is required, how much coffee is required on a daily basis. They would know how much is required next week, they would know how much is required next month, but it's all in their mind, right? They're not on paper, it's all in their mind. So the way to formally document these requirements is called a purchase requisition. How do we document the requirements? These are documented internally in SAP or the system using what is called as purchase requisition or PREQ. So what is a PREQ? A PREQ is a way to formally document the requirement for goods or services. So it's a tool to formally document requirements. And another characteristic is it's an internal document, meaning it's not a document that goes out to the vendor. For example, if the baker says that he requires 100 kilos of flour next week and records it in a PREQ, it's not something that goes out to the vendor. It's an internal document that needs to be further acted upon to let that actual purchase order go to the vendor. So, these documents are definitely indicative, meaning they only indicate a requirement. That does not mean that requirement is true. The baker might not know that there is a 100 kilo bag of flour lying in another plant which can be transferred to this plant. He's doing his job. He doesn't know what's happening in terms of all the goods that are lying across the company. He just knows that next week or next day he requires 100 kilos of flour. That's it. If he wants to document it, he can document it as a purchase requisition. Later, somebody in the purchasing department consolidates these and then takes action that's more actionable, meaning does a purchase order need to be sent, or Maybe there is some stock residing in another plant. Maybe a stock transfer order needs to be created between Chicago plant and San Francisco plant. That's the duty of the purchasing manager. So like I said, purchase requisition is a formal tool to document the requirements, and it's a completely internal document, meaning it does not leave the company. Like a purchase order which goes out of the company into the vendor's location and the vendor supplies the goods, right? That's an external document. When I mean an internal document, it's only used within the company. It doesn't go out of the company. And number 3 is it's indicative. It's indicative of what? It's indicative of a requirement. Now that requirement could be met with other means without actually creating a PO. We don't know that. Or the indicative requirement could be consolidated to create a much bigger PO. For reasons that we know, right? Bigger volumes give better prices, right? So finally, this PREC can eventually be converted into a purchase order or many other documents that go out to the vendor and eventually is acted upon. So that's a purchase requisition. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to create a purchase requisition and see how it can be converted to a purchase order. So how do we create a purchase order? So how do we create a purchase requisition in SAP? Go to logistics, go to material management, purchasing, purchase requisition. It's right underneath the purchase order. So go click on create, click on item overview, and over here you can enter the materials. Coffee, coffee beans, and we require 100 pounds of coffee beans. And where do we require it? We require it in the Chicago plant. Alright, now the first thing that you have to enter here is called a valuation price. What is a valuation price? So a valuation price is an expected price. So the expected price is, say, $10 per pound. Why do we need to put it here? Why doesn't it pick this up from the info record? Well, the info record is more of a negotiated price. It's already negotiated. The vendor is ready to give it at that price. Typically, the system can be configured to pick this from the material master. Remember, in the material master accounting view, there is a place where the price is determined automatically. If you double click this material, go to accounting view, this is the moving average price. So in the same purchase requisition, you can create more materials like flour, like sugar, so on and so forth. So you can just save this purchase requisition and a number is created. Copy that number, Control C, close it. Now this purchase requisition can be converted to a purchase order by going to the purchase order, create, and then click the document overview on, select the purchase requisition by clicking on this little diamond box and select my purchase requisitions. So it just pulls you all the purchase requisitions that you have created. And if you want to search for purchase requisitions created by somebody else, you can very well go there and click on purchase requisitions and select the purchase requisitions by a variety of criteria, by materials, by vendor, by who has created it, what date it was created, what plant we are looking for the purchase requisitions, so on and so forth. But for now, let's just pick the purchase requisition that I have created based on my purchase requisitions, and then you know what to do here, right? Select it and click on adopt or drag it to your shopping cart. You click on adopt. If you click on adopt, it has pulled in all the details from the purchase requisition, like the material, the quantities, dates. But what it does not have is the vendor. Remember, in the purchase requisition, when we created the purchase requisition, we did not enter a vendor. The selection of a vendor is not a choice that the purchase requisitioner has. So a baker requiring 100 kilos of coffee can just document his requirement as 100 kilos of coffee is required or flour is required. He doesn't care which vendor supplies that material. It's the duty of the purchasing manager to decide the vendor and then put it here. For example, in our case, we are going to use 4001. And for 4001, what is the price of coffee beans? Say $10. Can delivery date be met? Let's say yes. And now it says a scheduling agreement exists. Well, in the previous chapters, we have created contracts and scheduling agreements, right? If you want to use one of those, you could use that. You know how to use them, right? So go to the far right, and then in the outline agreement column, you can put in the contract number or the scheduling agreement number, and the price that was determined in that agreement will automatically be pulled into the conditions tab. For now, we didn't use an outline agreement, so it's asking us for a price and we have put a price of $10. Hit enter, enter, and save. And from this point on, the rest of the steps would remain the same. Create purchase order, create goods receipt, create invoice receipt. Now, if you go back to the history of the purchase order, you don't see a history, right? Because we have not done any further steps yet. We didn't do a goods receipt, we didn't do an invoice receipt. But there is a precursor document to this, right? What is a precursor document to this purchase order? Meaning the previous document. The previous document is the purchase requisition. And if you want to see that, you can see that at the line item level. Now, that should tell you something else here. Meaning, one purchase order can be created from multiple purchase requisitions. You want to see that? Go back. Let's go create more purchase requisitions. This time it's for a quantity of 150, right? At whatever be the price, say $10 or $15. And that's for the Chicago plant. Right? So this is our first purchase requisition. 64. Remember that number, 64. And let's create another purchase order. This time, let's put it for 250 pounds. And it could be either in the Chicago plant or in the San Francisco plant or any other plant. And save it. And our second purchase requisition is 65. Now let's go back to the creation of PO. Create purchase order. This time we are going to convert 64 and 65. Right? So select both of them and click on adopt. You see, you got both these line items here, right? And select the vendor. Can the dates be met? Yeah, they can be met. Scheduling agreement exists. Yeah, we know that. We don't care. And there you go. We are able to combine multiple purchase requisitions into a purchase order. Now remember, one was for a quantity of 150 and the second one was a quantity of 250. Now let's save this purchase order, and I want to show you something else. Now, can you create another PO with reference to one of these purchase requisitions? Let's see. Select that purchase requisition and as usual, click on adapt. Select the vendor and the PO quantity that we have created in the purchase requisition was for a quantity of 150 or 250. Now it's not shown here. Why? Because that purchase requisition has been consumed. So once it's consumed, the quantity in that purchase requisition is deemed as complete. Why? Think of this. This baker has asked for 100 kilos of flour, right? And created a purchase requisition for it. Say 400,000,65 for a quantity of 100 kilos. Now you have converted that into a purchase order. And now if somebody else tries to accidentally convert this into another purchase order, then we are duplicating the requirement, isn't it? The baker has asked for 100 kilos of flour, but we are trying to procure it twice. So SAP cleverly consumes that quantity and deems it as complete, meaning that purchase requisition is no longer relevant. But it still pulls the purchase requisitions here because you've asked for your purchase requisitions. So SAP does not know what to do with it. So you just ask for the purchase requisitions, it just gives you those purchase requisitions. But it cleverly masks the PO quantity. Why? Because it knows that the purchase quantity has already been consumed and created as a purchase order. So there is no need to duplicate the purchase order for that purchase requisition. Now, instead of just pulling your own purchase requisitions, you can do something else. You can pull in the purchase requisitions that are open. Meaning, if a purchase requisition created for this quantity, say 400065, has not been converted to a purchase order yet, that will be deemed as open. But if it has already been converted, then it should be deemed as closed. Right? So when you're trying to create purchase orders with reference to purchase requisitions, you don't want to pick up closed purchase requisitions, right? Meaning it's already been created to a purchase order. Maybe the purchase order is already sent to a vendor. You don't care about those kind of purchase requisitions. You only care about purchase requisitions that have not been converted yet, meaning they are open. So how do you pick them up? So, like I said, in the document overview, select purchase requisitions and click on open only. Okay, you could click released also, but we have not seen the release functionality yet, so let's not worry about that. For now, if you want to select, you can select that and click OK. Now it says no data exists because all the purchase requisitions we have created have been converted. So let's go create another purchase requisition like so. For coffee beans, quantity of say 350, just so that we can differentiate that material. And for the plant Chicago 1, and what's the price? Say $9. Save it. What's the purchase requisition number? Ending in 66. Now go back and go to creation of purchase order, and in the document overview select purchase requisitions, and the material is coffee beans. So essentially what we are saying is pick up, remove this guy, pick up all the purchase requisitions for coffee beans that are open. Execute. You see that? 66, the one that we have just created. Drag and drop it, and you can create the purchase order as usual. So a purchase requisition can be open or closed. An open purchase requisition is a purchase requisition that has some amount in it that has not been converted yet. It could be the entire 100 kilos, or it could be 50 kilos that's converted. A closed purchase requisition is a purchase requisition that has already been converted to a purchase order.